My entitled aunt tried to steal my inheritance by forging my dying grandmother's will. She didn't know Grandma had already outsmarted her from her hospital bed. My grandmother was the smartest person I've ever known. Not book smart, although she was that too. She read 2 novels a week until the day she couldn't hold a book anymore. I mean life smart. Street smart. The kind of smart where she could read a room in 3 seconds and know exactly who was lying, who was scared, and who was about to cause trouble. She grew up dirt poor in rural Tennessee, the youngest of 6 kids in a house with no indoor plumbing. She left home at 17 with $40 and a bus ticket, worked her way through community college, and started buying rental properties in her 30s when everyone told her a woman had no business in real estate. By the time she was 70, she owned 11 rental properties across 3 counties and had a net worth of just over $2 million. She drove a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, wore the same 3 cardigans in rotation, and thought spending more than $12 on a bottle of wine was showing off. She was the most quietly powerful person I've ever known. She was also the kindest, most generous woman you'd ever meet. She paid for my college, all 4 years, tuition and books, without me ever asking. She helped my cousin Marcus start his mechanic shop with a $50,000 interest-free loan that she later forgot to collect on. She quietly covered medical bills for neighbors who couldn't afford them. She donated to the local food bank every single month for 20 years. She never bragged about any of it. If you tried to thank her, she'd wave her hand and say, "Money's only good if it does good," and change the subject to whatever was happening on Jeopardy. But my grandmother also had a weakness, and that weakness had a name: Aunt Victoria. Victoria was my mom's older sister, and she was, how do I put this diplomatically, a professional victim with a shopping addiction and the moral compass of a hungry raccoon. She'd never held a job for more than 6 months. She'd been through 3 marriages, each one ending when the husband realized she'd maxed out every credit card they had and hidden the statements. Husband number 1 lasted 4 years, number 2 lasted 2, number 3 lasted 11 months, a personal record for shortest disaster. She drove a BMW she couldn't afford, wore designer clothes she bought on credit, carried handbags that cost more than some people's rent, and lived in a condo that, unbeknownst to most of the family, my grandmother secretly paid the mortgage on. Because that's what Grandma did. She enabled Victoria because Victoria was her daughter, and she loved her, even when loving her meant watching her make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And Victoria was absolutely pathologically obsessed with my grandmother's money. For as long as I can remember, Aunt Victoria had been positioning herself as Grandma's favorite. She'd show up every Sunday for dinner, not because she cared about spending time with her mother, but because she wanted to be seen caring. She'd bring flowers, always the expensive kind, always charge to a credit card she couldn't pay off, and make a big show of helping in the kitchen, though she'd usually just rearrange things and get in the way. Then she'd spend the rest of the visit dropping hints about money. "Everything is so expensive these days, Mom. I don't know how people survive on a normal income. You know, I saw this article about how important it is to plan your estate early. Have you thought about that, Mom?" She was about as subtle as a sledgehammer in a china shop. My mom, Karen, was the opposite in every way. She visited Grandma because she actually loved her. She'd bring groceries without being asked, not fancy stuff, just the basics Grandma needed. She'd sit with Grandma for hours just talking about the neighborhood, about books, about whatever drama was happening on their favorite TV shows. She managed Grandma's medications, organized her pillboxes every Sunday, drove her to every doctor's appointment, and handled all the boring, unglamorous, thankless work of caring for an aging parent. The stuff that Victoria would never, ever lower herself to do. I was close with Grandma, too. After college, I moved back to our hometown, partly for a job, partly because I missed her. I'd visit 3 or 4 times a week. We'd play gin rummy at her kitchen table. She beat me almost every time and was not gracious about it. We'd watch old movies on TCM. She'd tell me stories about building her business, about the time a contractor tried to cheat her, and she showed up at his office with a lawyer and a very detailed spreadsheet. Those afternoons were some of the happiest times of my life. I didn't know it then, but I was storing up memories I'd need later. Victoria's son, Tyler, was the one family member who saw through his mother completely. He'd moved to Portland right after high school and kept his distance. He called Grandma on her birthday and at Christmas sent her photos of his life out west and quietly avoided Victoria's drama. "My mom is who she is," he told me once with the tired resignation of someone who'd accepted a painful truth a long time ago. "I love her, but I don't trust her. And neither should you. I should have listened more carefully." Then, when I was 26, Grandma got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors delivered the news in a small, beige consultation room that smelled like hand sanitizer and bad coffee. They said she had maybe 6 months, probably less. They were kind about it, but there's no kind way to tell someone that the person they love most in the world is dying. The diagnosis hit our family like a bomb going off in the middle of a quiet room. My mom was devastated. She'd go to the hospital every day and sit by Grandma's bed for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just holding her hand in silence. Marcus was devastated. He closed his shop for a week and drove 4 hours to be there. I was devastated in a way I didn't know was possible. The idea of a world without my grandmother in it felt like trying to imagine a world without gravity. It just didn't compute. We all rallied around Grandma, spending as much time with her as possible, trying to make her remaining months comfortable and full of love. Aunt Victoria rallied too, but for very different reasons. Within a week of the diagnosis, Victoria launched what I can only describe as a campaign. She was at the hospital every single day, but not to comfort Grandma. She was there to talk about the will. She'd bring it up constantly, in that fake casual way of hers, always with a concerned expression and a gentle voice that made my skin crawl. "Mom, have you thought about what's going to happen with the properties? I just want to make sure you're not stressed about it." "Mom, you know I've always loved that house on Maple Street. Remember when I used to play in the backyard as a kid?" "Mom, I just want to make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to worry about anything. You should be resting, not thinking about legal stuff. Maybe I could help manage things." Grandma would just look at her with those sharp, knowing eyes that could see through walls, through lies, through everything, and say, "Everything's handled, Victoria. Don't you worry about it." But Victoria did worry about it. She worried about it obsessively, because she knew something that made her very, very nervous. Grandma's existing will, drafted 5 years earlier with her longtime attorney, split everything equally between my mom and Victoria, with smaller portions set aside for the grandchildren, me, Marcus, and Victoria's son Tyler, who lived in Portland and wanted nothing to do with any of this. Victoria didn't want an equal split. She wanted it all. She felt she deserved it all because in her mind, she was the one who'd sacrificed the most, though what exactly she'd sacrificed, nobody could ever figure out. I know all of this because Victoria, in her infinite wisdom, decided to recruit me to her cause. She cornered me one day in the hospital parking lot, blocking my path to my car with her BMW, and said, "Listen, sweetie, I need to talk to you about something important. Your mom doesn't really need the money. She and your dad are doing fine. They have the house paid off. They have retirement savings. But I'm struggling. I'm really struggling. And I think it's only fair that your grandmother leaves the bulk of the estate to me. I'm her firstborn. It's tradition. Maybe you could talk to her? Put in a good word? She listens to you." I stared at her. I stared at her designer sunglasses and her manicured nails and her BMW and her cashmere scarf. And I thought about my mom driving a 12-year-old Honda and spending every free hour at Grandma's bedside. "Aunt Victoria, Grandma is dying. She's in a hospital bed with tubes in her arms. I'm not going to pressure her about her will." Victoria's face changed. The concerned niece mask slipped, and underneath was something cold and hard and calculating. "You're just like your mother," she said. "No ambition, no vision. You'll regret this." She got in her BMW and drove away. And that interaction told me everything I needed to know about what Victoria was capable of. But I still had no idea, none, how far she'd actually go. About 2 months into Grandma's illness, something happened that changed everything. Grandma called me to her hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon. She waited until the nurse left, until the hallway was quiet, until we were completely alone. Then she grabbed my hand with surprising strength and said, "Baby, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully and not interrupt." She told me she'd overheard Victoria on the phone in the hallway outside her room. It was late at night, around 11 p.m., and Victoria thought Grandma was asleep. But Grandma had always been a light sleeper, and the hospital walls were thin. Victoria was talking to a man, Grandma didn't recognize the voice, about the document. She was talking about changing the will, about making sure everything goes to the right person, about how she won't know the difference, and by the time anyone figures it out, it'll be done. Grandma's eyes were blazing as she told me this, not with fear, with fury, and with something else, a sharp, strategic intelligence that cancer hadn't touched. "She's going to try something," Grandma said. "I don't know exactly what, but I know my daughter. I've known what she is for a long time. She's going to try to take everything." My heart was hammering. "What do we do?" I asked. Grandma smiled, that sly, knowing I've already won smile that I'd seen 1,000 times across the gin rummy table. "We've already done it," she said. Grandma explained everything, and as she talked, I realized that this woman, this 74-year-old woman lying in a hospital bed with cancer eating her alive, had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. 2 weeks before her diagnosis, almost as if she'd sensed what was coming, as if her body had whispered a warning that her mind had heard, she'd gone to see her lawyer. Not her regular attorney, who Victoria knew about, a new one, a woman named Helen Park, who specialized in estate planning and trust law, and who had a reputation in the legal community for building documents that were essentially bulletproof. Together, Grandma and Helen had created a brand new will and, more importantly, a living trust. The trust was the key piece. Unlike a simple will, which has to go through probate, a public, lengthy court process where anyone can contest it, a living trust is private, takes effect immediately, and is extraordinarily difficult to challenge. It's like the difference between a wooden fence and a concrete wall. Grandma had transferred everything into the trust, all 11 rental properties, her investment accounts, her savings, her life insurance. Everything she owned was now held by the Helen Park-administered trust with clear, detailed, legally ironclad instructions for distribution. The beneficiaries were laid out with surgical precision. My mom would receive the majority of the estate, 8 of the 11 properties, and 60% of the financial assets, because she was the child who had actually been present, caring, and responsible. Marcus and I each received a property and a portion of the investments. Victoria's son Tyler received a small cash gift and a letter from Grandma telling him she loved him and hoped he'd visit Tennessee someday. And Victoria? Victoria received exactly one thing: the condo she lived in with the mortgage paid off. Nothing more, not a single property, not a dollar of investments, just the home she already occupied, free and clear, so she'd have a roof over her head. It was generous, honestly, more generous than Victoria deserved. But here's the genius part, the part that made me realize my grandmother wasn't just smart, she was brilliant. She knew Victoria would try to contest it. She knew Victoria would fight and lie and scheme. So she'd taken precautions that would make a spy novelist jealous. First, the trust signing was videotaped. Not just a quick recording, a full, professional quality video. Grandma sat in Helen Park's office, dressed in her favorite blue cardigan, looking directly into the camera with those sharp, clear eyes, and explained in detail exactly why she was distributing her assets the way she was. She walked through each decision. She named each beneficiary. And she specifically addressed Victoria. "I love my daughter Victoria," Grandma said on the video, her voice steady and strong. "I have always loved her, and I always will. But I do not trust her with significant financial assets. She has demonstrated a lifelong pattern of financial irresponsibility, and I believe giving her more would ultimately harm her rather than help her. I have provided her with a home, free of debt, which is more than sufficient. This is my decision, made freely and with full understanding of its implications." Second, Grandma had 2 independent witnesses present at the signing, neither of them family members, neither of them connected to anyone in our family. One was a retired judge, the other was a professor of law at the state university. Both provided sworn affidavits confirming Grandma's mental competency and the voluntary nature of her decisions. Additionally, Grandma's own physician provided a written assessment of her cognitive function on the same day, confirming she was lucid, oriented, and fully capable of making legal decisions. Third, and this is the part that still makes my jaw drop, Grandma had hired a private investigator. She'd suspected Victoria was up to something specific, and she wanted proof. The PI, a former police detective named Ray Cortez, had been following Victoria for 3 weeks before Grandma even told me about any of this. Grandma told me all of this from her hospital bed, looking exhausted but deeply, profoundly satisfied, like a general who'd already won the war but was waiting for the enemy to figure it out. "When the time comes," she said, squeezing my hand, "Helen has everything. All the documents, the video, the PI's report. You just need to make sure your mother knows to call Helen first, before Victoria can do anything. Promise me." I promised. I promised with tears running down my face and my heart breaking and my grandmother's hand in mine. And then we watched The Price is Right, because that's what we always did on Tuesday afternoons. She guessed the price of a washing machine within $5. She always was better at that game than me. Over the next 4 months, I visited Grandma almost every day. Some days she was strong enough to play cards and crack jokes. Other days, she could barely keep her eyes open. But even on the worst days, when the pain was bad and the medication made her foggy, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Don't let me sleep through Jeopardy." She never lost her sense of humor. She never lost her sharpness. The cancer took her body, piece by piece, but it never touched her mind. She was Grandma until the very end. Grandma passed away 4 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning in early November. The leaves outside her hospital window had turned gold and red. She went peacefully, with my mom holding one hand and me holding the other. The last thing she said so quietly I almost missed it was, "Take care of each other." It was the worst day of my life, but I'm grateful, so deeply grateful, that I was there. The funeral was beautiful. Over 300 people came, neighbors, tenants, business associates, friends from church, people she'd helped over the decades who wanted to pay their respects. Even the mayor showed up and gave a short speech about Grandma's contributions to the community. The flower arrangements filled the entire front of the church. Victoria wore head-to-toe black Chanel and cried louder than anyone. She positioned herself at the front of the receiving line and accepted condolences as if she were the chief mourner, the primary griever, the one who'd lost the most. She gave a eulogy that was 90% about herself. I don't know how I'll go on without her, and she was my mother first, and no one understood her like I did, and we had such a special bond. My mom sat quietly in the front row, holding my dad's hand, and said nothing. She didn't need to perform her grief. It was written on her face. Then came the part Victoria had been waiting for. The reading of the will. Or rather, what Victoria thought would be the reading of the will. Victoria moved fast, terrifyingly fast. The day after the funeral, literally the next morning, before the flowers on the grave had even wilted, she showed up at my mom's house. She was dressed in business casual, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression of practiced solemnity. She sat down at my mom's kitchen table, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table with both hands, like she was presenting a peace treaty. "Mom changed her mind at the end," Victoria said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She called me to the hospital about 2 weeks before she passed. She was very emotional. She said she felt guilty about how she'd treated me over the years, about how she'd always favored Karen. She wanted to make things right, so she had a new will drawn up. It leaves everything to me, the properties, the accounts, everything. She wanted me to manage the estate. The document was impressive looking. Thick paper, legal formatting, notarized stamps, witness signatures. It was dated 2 weeks before Grandma's death, and it left every single asset, every property, every account, every penny to Victoria Ann Caldwell. My mom got nothing. The grandchildren got nothing. My mom looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, and I gave her the tiniest nod. The nod that meant, "We're ready." "I think we should have the lawyers sort this out," my mom said calmly. Victoria's face twitched, just slightly, a micro-expression of surprise and irritation. She hadn't expected calm. She'd expected shock, tears, maybe a fight she could win through sheer force of personality and emotional manipulation. "There's nothing to sort out," Victoria snapped, the sympathetic mask slipping. "This is Mom's final wish, her dying wish. Are you really going to disrespect her dying wish, after everything she did for you?" "I think we should have the lawyers sort this out," my mom repeated in exactly the same tone. Victoria left in a huff, clutching her fake will like a shield. The next morning, my mom called Helen Park. What happened next was like watching a legal demolition in slow motion. Beautiful, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Helen filed the trust documents with the probate court. The trust, being a living trust, superseded any will, real or fake. The assets were already transferred. The instructions were already in place. Victoria's document was legally irrelevant, even if it had been genuine. But Helen didn't stop there. She wanted to expose Victoria completely, not just to protect the estate, but to ensure Victoria faced consequences for what she'd done. The PI's report came in, and it was devastating. Ray Cortez had documented everything. Victoria had been visiting a man named Dale Whitfield at his home office on 4 separate occasions over the past month. Dale Whitfield was a disbarred attorney. He'd lost his license 3 years earlier for, you guessed it, forging legal documents in an inheritance dispute. The PI had photographs of Victoria entering and leaving Dale's home, time-stamped and geotagged. He'd also obtained, through legal means I won't get into, a receipt from a notary service that had notarized the fake will. The notary was a woman named Brenda Solis, who happened to be Dale Whitfield's girlfriend. The forged will itself fell apart under forensic scrutiny. Helen hired a handwriting expert who determined that the signature on the document did not match Grandma's known signatures. It was close, but the pressure patterns and letter formations were wrong. The paper was wrong too. It was standard office paper, not the legal stock that any legitimate attorney would use. The formatting contained errors that no practicing lawyer would make. The 2 witnesses listed on the fake will were friends of Victoria's, women from her book club. When Helen's investigator contacted them, they crumbled almost immediately. Both admitted that Victoria had asked them to sign a family document at her kitchen table one evening, telling them it was just a formality and nothing to worry about. They claimed they didn't know it was a forged will. One of them was crying when she gave her statement. But the real knockout punch, the moment that ended everything, was the video. Grandma's video, recorded in Helen Park's office months before Victoria's scheme even began. Grandma sitting in her blue cardigan, looking into the camera with those sharp, knowing, undefeatable eyes and saying, "If my daughter Victoria presents any document claiming to be a newer version of my will, it is not genuine. I have made my final wishes clear in this trust, and I will not be changing them. Any document that contradicts this trust is fraudulent, and I want that stated clearly for the record." She'd known. She'd known all along what Victoria would do. She'd predicted it with the accuracy of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. And she'd built a fortress around her wishes that Victoria couldn't breach, couldn't climb, couldn't tunnel under. The court proceedings were swift. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Hawkins, reviewed the trust documents, the video, the PI's report, the handwriting analysis, and the forensic examination of the forged will. She spent less than 20 minutes deliberating. She didn't just rule in our favor. She referred Victoria's case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. She called the forgery brazen and premeditated, and noted that it represented a calculated attempt to defraud family members during a period of grief. Victoria was charged with forgery in the first degree, fraud, and attempted theft by deception. Dale Whitfield was charged as an accomplice. Brenda Solis, the notary, was charged with notary fraud and had her commission revoked. Victoria tried to play the victim, of course. She hired a defense attorney, with what money, I have no idea, probably a credit card, and tried to argue that she was confused by grief and didn't understand what she was signing and was manipulated by Dale Whitfield. The judge wasn't buying it. The PI photos showing 4 separate visits to a disbarred attorney, the coordinated effort with fake witnesses, the detailed planning evident in the document, this wasn't confusion. This wasn't grief. This was a calculated multi-week scheme to steal $2 million from her own family. Victoria took a plea deal to avoid a trial. Her defense attorney, the third one she'd hired after the first 2 quit when they saw the evidence, advised her that going before a jury with a videotaped rebuttal from the deceased would be catastrophic. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a felony conviction on her permanent record. She was also ordered to pay restitution for all legal costs her fraud had caused our family, approximately $35,000. The judge, during sentencing, told Victoria that her actions represented a profound betrayal of family trust during a period of grief, and that she was fortunate the family agreed to a plea arrangement. Victoria cried in the courtroom. Real tears for once. But I noticed she was crying for herself, for her situation, her consequences, her ruined plans. Not for Grandma. Not for what she'd tried to do to her own mother's legacy. Even in her lowest moment, Victoria's tears were selfish. And the condo? The one Grandma had generously left her? Mortgage-free so she'd always have a home? Victoria had secretly taken out a home equity loan on it 6 months before Grandma died, borrowing against the property to fund her lifestyle. She'd used the money for clothes, restaurants, a vacation to Cabo, and payments to Dale Whitfield for his services. She couldn't make the loan payments. The bank foreclosed. She lost the condo within a year of Grandma's death. The one thing Grandma had given her, the one generous, loving gift, and Victoria had already destroyed it before the ink was dry. Last I heard, Victoria was living in a studio apartment on the other side of town, working as a receptionist at a dentist's office for $14 an hour. Her BMW was repossessed. Her designer wardrobe was sold on consignment. The 3 ex-husbands she'd burned through over the years weren't exactly lining up to help. Her son Tyler sent her a text that said, "I'm not surprised," and that was the extent of his involvement. My mom used her inheritance wisely, exactly as Grandma knew she would. She set up a scholarship fund in Grandma's name for kids from the same rural Tennessee area where Grandma grew up. Kids who, like Grandma, had more potential than opportunity. She maintained the rental properties, keeping rents affordable for the tenants who'd been there for years, some of whom had known Grandma personally. She donated to the local food bank every month, continuing Grandma's tradition. She drove the same 12-year-old Honda. My mom also did something that would have made Grandma proud. She reached out to Victoria's 2 book club friends, the ones who'd been tricked into signing the fake will as witnesses. They were terrified they'd face criminal charges too, but my mom, being the person she is, advocated for leniency. She told the DA that these women had been manipulated by Victoria, and she believed they genuinely didn't understand what they were signing. The charges against them were dropped in exchange for their full cooperation and testimony. One of them sent my mom a handwritten letter thanking her. The other sent flowers every month for a year. Grandma would have approved. "Punish the snake," she would have said. "Not the mice it scared into helping." Marcus expanded his mechanic shop and hired 3 more employees. He named the new service bay Grandma's Garage and hung her photo on the wall, the one where she's standing in front of her first rental property in 1982, 29 years old, hands on her hips, grinning like she just conquered the world. Because she had. As for me, I used my inheritance to put a down payment on a house. A little 3-bedroom Craftsman with a big backyard and a wraparound porch, just a few blocks from where Grandma used to live. I planted a garden, tomatoes, basil, sunflowers, all the things she used to grow. Sometimes on Tuesday afternoons, I sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and watch The Price is Right on my laptop, and I swear, I can feel her sitting next to me, those sharp eyes twinkling, that sly smile, that cardigan. She outsmarted Victoria from beyond the grave. She protected her family even after she was gone. She turned her own death, the most vulnerable moment of her life, into the ultimate checkmate against the one person who tried to exploit it. That's not just karma. That's not just revenge. That's legacy. That's a woman who spent her whole life building things, properties, relationships, trust, and who made damn sure that the things she built would outlast the people who tried to tear them down. I miss you every day, Grandma. Every single day. And you were right about everything. You were always right about everything. Especially about Victoria. Rest easy. We're taking care of each other, just like you asked.